When the raging waters of a sudden flood swept through a small town, everyone was running for safety. But in the middle of the chaos, one brave French bulldog refused to abandon her newborn puppies. What she did next stunned rescuers and inspired an entire community. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about the unstoppable power of a mother's love and the courage that even the smallest among us can show when everything is at stake. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss more inspiring stories like this one. The morning began like any other in the small riverside town of Millstone, tucked quietly in a valley where people often spoke more about the weather than about their worries. But that particular morning was different. Rain had been falling non-stop for 3 days, turning the ground into a soggy mess and swelling the nearby river far beyond its usual calm banks. By noon, the sound of rain hitting rooftops was drowned out by the rush of water breaking through barriers that were never built to withstand such force. While families scrambled to higher ground, clutching their belongings and calling out to neighbors, in a forgotten corner behind an old mechanic's shop, a small black French bulldog named Luna was huddled inside a wooden crate she had claimed as her shelter. Inside that crate were her most precious treasures, 5 tiny puppies, only a week old, still blind and fragile. Luna had been a stray for most of her life, surviving on scraps tossed from the back doors of restaurants or what she could sniff out in trash bins. But when she became a mother, her instincts sharpened. Every ounce of her energy was devoted to keeping those fragile bodies warm, fed, and safe. As the rain poured harder, water began to creep across the dirt floor of the lot where her crate rested. At first, it was just a trickle, a harmless stream that dampened the edge of the wood. But Luna sensed danger. Her ears twitched, and she shifted her body protectively over her puppies. The rain smelled different that day. It smelled of fear, of rushing currents, of something she couldn't quite understand but instinctively knew was a threat. By mid-afternoon, the trickle had become a stream, and the stream was quickly becoming a river of its own. The wooden crate trembled as water lapped against it. Luna barked, short, sharp cries that seemed to call for help, though no one was there to hear her. She nudged each puppy closer to her chest, curling her body around them, her eyes fixed on the rising water. In another part of town, families were being evacuated. Emergency crews went door to door, urging residents to move quickly. Volunteers with trucks and boats rushed to pull people to safety. But no one knew about the small French bulldog and her litter of puppies hidden behind the mechanic's shop. To the world, they were invisible. As the sun began to set behind thick, dark clouds, the water surged into the lot, filling it faster than Luna could react. The crate rocked violently, and one of the puppies squealed in distress as the cold water touched its tiny body. Luna barked again, louder this time, and leapt into action. With her mouth, she gently lifted one puppy, scrambling onto a stack of old tires nearby to place it on slightly higher ground. Then she returned, wading through the water to fetch another, and another. Her movements were frantic but precise, her heart pounding as her body shook with both exhaustion and determination. By the time all 5 puppies were placed on the makeshift perch of tires, the crate had nearly tipped over and was carried away by the water. Luna climbed up, shivering, and wrapped her small body around the shivering pile of newborns. She licked their damp fur, trying desperately to warm them as the night grew colder. From the main road, a man named Daniel Foster, a volunteer firefighter, drove past in his truck, scanning for signs of anyone left behind. He thought he heard barking, faint but persistent, carried by the wind and the roar of rushing water. He slowed the truck, leaning out into the rain, and there it was again, high-pitched, urgent, and desperate. He switched on his flashlight, sweeping it across the lot, and his beam caught sight of a small black shape perched atop a pile of tires, surrounded by something moving. His heart clenched when he realized what he was seeing. A mother dog shielding her puppies from the flood. Daniel didn't hesitate. He pulled on his raincoat, waded into the lot, and shouted, "Hang on, little one, I'm coming." Of course, Luna didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone. She barked once more, then lowered her head protectively over her babies. The water was rising fast. Daniel knew he had only minutes to act. As he fought his way toward them, Luna's eyes locked onto his. In that moment, drenched and trembling, she wasn't just a stray dog. She was a mother, pleading for the lives of her children. Would Daniel reach them in time? And if he did, would the frightened mother trust him enough to let him near her precious puppies? The flood was unforgiving. The night was growing darker, and the line between survival and tragedy was thinner than ever. Daniel's boots sank deep into the muddy water as he pushed forward, the current tugging at his legs with every step. His flashlight beam danced wildly across the lot, but his eyes never left the trembling figure on the pile of tires. Luna stood frozen, her small frame tense, her body curved protectively around her 5 puppies. Every drop of rain that fell on her soaked coat seemed to weigh her down, yet she refused to move. Her loyalty was stronger than fear. "Easy, girl," Daniel murmured, his voice steady even though his pulse was racing. He had seen desperate animals before. Dogs cornered by fire, cats stranded in trees, but this was different. This wasn't just survival. This was sacrifice. A mother refusing to abandon her children even as the water climbed higher around her. Luna let out a low growl, almost inaudible against the roar of the flood. Her eyes glistened in the beam of Daniel's light, 2 orbs of both warning and desperation. She didn't trust humans. The scars on her life had taught her not to. Abandoned long ago, chased away from doorsteps, she had learned to rely only on herself. And now, as this stranger approached, all she could think about was one question. Would he hurt her babies? Daniel crouched lower in the water, trying to appear less threatening. "I'm not here to hurt you," he whispered. "I just want to help." His words were lost to the storm, but his tone carried something universal: compassion. He stretched out a gloved hand, careful not to move too quickly. The water surged again, splashing against the tires and nearly knocking one of the puppies off the slippery rubber. Luna whipped her head around, catching the tiny body with her muzzle and dragging it back. Daniel froze, watching the incredible display of instinct. He felt a lump form in his throat. She was exhausted, trembling from cold, yet she refused to let even one of her puppies slip away. He inched closer, water now up to his thighs. "I don't have much time," he thought, gritting his teeth. If the current got stronger, neither he nor the dogs would make it out. Luna barked sharply, her voice hoarse. It wasn't aggression, it was warning. She pressed her nose against her puppies, nudging them into a tighter pile as though she was telling them, "Stay close, stay safe." Daniel pulled off his jacket, wrapping it around his chest, and took a slow breath. He had to gain her trust, even for just a second. He dug into his pocket and pulled out a protein bar he had shoved there hours earlier. Tearing it open with his teeth, he tossed a piece gently onto the edge of the tires. Luna's nose twitched. Her body shuddered. For a moment, her eyes softened, hunger battling with fear. She hadn't eaten in days, not since the storm had driven people inside and the trash bins she usually scavenged were sealed tight. Her ribs showed through her soaked fur, a silent testament to her suffering. She sniffed the food but didn't move, torn between survival and suspicion. Daniel took the chance, stepping closer until the water was nearly at his waist. "Come on, girl," he coaxed, his voice cracking from the cold air. "Let me help you. Let me help them." A sudden crash split the night as a nearby shed collapsed under the flood. The noise startled Luna, and she barked again, curling tighter around her puppies. Daniel knew time was running out. His breath came in sharp gasps as he reached for the stack of tires, his fingers clinging to the slick rubber. He was only a foot away now. Luna growled, teeth bared, but Daniel didn't back down. Instead, he lowered his gaze, making himself small, non-threatening. He extended his hand again, letting the rain wash over it, letting her see he had nothing to hide. The moment stretched on, seconds feeling like hours. Luna's nose brushed against his glove, then recoiled. Her heart pounded in her chest. She looked at her puppies, then at Daniel and back again. Finally, she made her choice. With a trembling whine, Luna stepped aside just enough for Daniel to see the small bundle of shivering puppies pressed against her belly. Her eyes never left his, watchful, suspicious, but also pleading. Daniel swallowed hard. That tiny shift, that fragile trust, was all the opening he needed. He whispered, good girl," and reached slowly toward the nearest puppy, his hand shaking from both cold and fear. As his fingers brushed the damp fur of the first puppy, Luna growled low, her body trembling, but she didn't bite. She stayed, torn between instinct and hope. Daniel lifted the puppy gently, pressing it against his chest inside his jacket. It whimpered softly, and Luna whined in response. He knew he had to move quickly, but would she allow him to take the rest? Or would this fragile trust shatter the moment he tried? The flood was still rising. He had no more than minutes left before the entire pile of tires was swallowed. The tiny body shivered in Daniel's arms, its fur damp and cold against his chest. He pressed the puppy inside his jacket, letting his own body heat shield it from the storm. The puppy gave a faint whimper, and Luna's ears twitched. Her eyes never left him, burning with fear and desperate calculation. "Good girl," Daniel murmured, his voice hoarse but gentle. "I'll bring him back, I promise." But promises meant nothing to a dog who had been abandoned before. Luna's paws shifted nervously on the wet tires, her nails scraping against rubber. She growled softly, not in anger but in warning. "Don't take them all. Don't take my family." Daniel's heart ached. He knew she didn't understand his intentions, not fully. To her, he was a stranger prying her babies away. Yet time was merciless. The flood surged higher, pushing debris through the lot. A rusted oil drum slammed into the side of the tires, rocking the pile. One of the puppies yelped as water splashed over them. Daniel flinched. No time, he thought. He needed to act. With his free arm, he reached again. Luna stiffened, muscles taut, but she didn't lunge. Her body blocked 3 of the puppies, but one sat slightly apart, its tiny head lifting weakly. Daniel stretched out, his fingers brushing the slick fur. He scooped the puppy into his jacket beside the first, holding them both tight against his chest. Too safe, for still with her. The water was now at Daniel's waist, icy and relentless. Each step he took was a battle against the current, and with 2 fragile lives pressed against his chest, the risk multiplied. He turned slightly, scanning the distance to his truck parked on higher ground. It was only 100 yards away, but in this storm it might as well have been a mile. "Hang on," he whispered to the puppies, his lips trembling from cold. He glanced back at Luna. She barked, a desperate, throaty sound. Her body trembled, soaked through, yet she refused to move an inch. Daniel hesitated. He could rush the 2 puppies to safety and return for the others, but what if the tires collapsed before he got back? What if Luna, believing he had stolen her children, fled into deeper water with the rest? A roar of rushing current pulled his attention as part of the fence at the edge of the lot gave way. Water gushed in, doubling in force. The pile of tires tilted precariously, sending 2 of the puppies tumbling dangerously close to the edge. Luna scrambled, her teeth gently catching one, her paw hooking the other back into place. She panted heavily, her body on the verge of collapse. Daniel knew he had no choice. He had to risk it. "Stay strong, girl," he said, though his voice cracked under the weight of the storm. With careful, dragging steps, he fought the water toward the truck. Every wave seemed intent on ripping the puppies from his arms, but he tightened his grip, shielding them with his body. His legs screamed with effort as he trudged forward, water rising to his ribs. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the nightmare. Entire tree branches swirling in the current, floating crates spinning like deadly weapons. Daniel ducked as one crashed nearby, the spray soaking his face. Finally, his boots hit gravel, higher ground. He staggered to the truck, threw open the door, and placed the 2 shivering puppies onto a blanket he had left on the passenger seat. They whimpered softly, their tiny bodies curling into the warmth. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted nothing more than to stay to make sure they were safe, but 4 more lives and their mother were still trapped. He spun back toward the lot. The tires were half submerged now. Luna's silhouette was barely visible against the flood, but he could see her head lifted, barking wildly as if calling to him. "I'm coming!" he shouted. His voice swallowed by the storm. He plunged back into the water, every step heavier than the last. His muscles screamed with fatigue, but adrenaline drove him forward. Halfway across, the current struck harder. Daniel lost his footing, crashing into the icy water. His body spun violently, dragged by the current. He gasped, choking as the flood filled his mouth. For a terrifying second, he thought of the 2 puppies waiting in the truck, safe but motherless if he failed. Clawing at the surface, he spotted a floating plank and grabbed it, using it to steady himself. He pulled his body upright, coughing water from his lungs. His flashlight, miraculously still strapped to his wrist, illuminated the tires, and what he saw froze his blood. The pile was crumbling. One of the larger tires shifted, dislodged by the current. It rolled away with a splash, leaving Luna scrambling to keep her footing. The puppies squealed, their tiny bodies sliding dangerously close to the flood. "No! Hold on!" Daniel shouted, forcing his legs forward. But just as he reached within 20 feet, a log slammed into him, knocking him under once more. Darkness swallowed him. His lungs screamed for air. His arms thrashed desperately, searching for something, anything, to cling to. For a heartbeat, the world blurred into silence and water. And then, his fingers brushed the slick rubber of the tires. He clung with everything he had, pulling himself up with raw, burning strength. As his head broke the surface, Luna's eyes met his. She was drenched, trembling, and wild with fear. But in her gaze was something new. Not just suspicion. Not just desperation. It was hope. Daniel gasped for breath, clinging to the tires with one hand. With the other, he reached again for the nearest puppy. The flood hadn't won yet. Daniel's fingers trembled as he clung to the tire, his body half submerged in the freezing current. His lungs burned from nearly drowning, but he forced himself to focus. The puppies were still there. Tiny, helpless bodies pressed against Luna's legs as the water climbed higher. "Come on, Daniel," he muttered to himself. One more push. The storm screamed around him, rain pelting down in sheets so heavy it felt like needles against his skin. Each wave threatened to tear his grip loose. But through the chaos, Luna's eyes locked on his. This time, she didn't growl. She didn't bark. She simply stared at him, her chest rising and falling in frantic rhythm. It was as if she understood. With one desperate heave, Daniel pulled himself higher onto the tilted pile of tires. His knees landed on slick rubber, his hands shaking as he reached toward the nearest puppy. The little one was barely holding on, its paws slipping with every surge of water. Luna nudged it back, keeping it from tumbling, but her strength was fading. "Easy, girl," Daniel whispered. "I'm here to help." He extended his hand slowly, careful not to spook her. For a moment, Luna hesitated, her ears pinned back, her muscles tense. Then, with a trembling whine, she stepped aside just enough for him to reach her pup. Daniel scooped the puppy into his arms, pressing it against his soaked chest. Its tiny heartbeat fluttered frantically against his skin. Relief flooded him, but there were still 3 more. The tires shifted again. Daniel nearly lost his footing as the entire stack groaned under the weight of the rushing water. He wrapped one arm around the puppy and gripped a tire with the other, teeth clenched against the icy flood dragging at his legs. "Hang on," he shouted, though the storm drowned out his words. Luna barked sharply, snapping her head toward the other pups as if urging him to hurry. She nudged the next one closer, guiding it toward him with her muzzle. Daniel reached, his fingers closing around the small, slippery body. He pulled it in, tucking it beside its sibling. 2 more safe, 2 more to go. But suddenly, a massive branch slammed into the side of the tire pile with a deafening crack. The stack lurched violently. Daniel staggered, nearly losing his grip on both puppies. Luna yelped as the water surged higher, covering her chest. The last 2 puppies squealed, pressed against her belly as the flood threatened to sweep them away. Panic surged in Daniel's chest. There was no more time for caution. He had to act now. "Trust me, girl," he shouted, lunging forward. In one swift motion, he reached out with both arms, snatching the last 2 puppies as the current ripped across the pile. For a split second, he thought he'd done it. He had all 4 pressed desperately against him. But the motion unbalanced him. His foot slipped. The world tilted. Daniel fell backward into the torrent. The puppies clutched in his arms. The impact stole his breath, icy water engulfing him once more. He kicked wildly, his muscles screaming as he fought to keep the tiny bodies above the surface. They squirmed and cried against his chest, fragile and terrified. He couldn't fail them. Not now. "Swim!" he gasped, forcing his body upward. His head broke the surface with a choking cough. The puppies whimpered, but they were alive. And then Luna. She leapt. With a desperate surge of strength, Luna plunged from the collapsing tires into the water beside him. Her black fur glistened under the flashes of lightning as she paddled fiercely against the current. She pressed her body against his side, her eyes locked on him as if saying, "I trust you. Don't let go." Daniel's throat tightened. For the first time, she wasn't guarding her puppies from him. She was fighting beside him. "Let's do this, girl," he whispered, teeth chattering. Together, they battled the flood. Daniel held the 4 puppies as high as he could, his arms aching, while Luna swam beside him, her body steadying his against the current. Step by agonizing step, they pushed forward, closer to the higher ground where his truck waited. But the river wasn't finished. A sudden surge slammed into them, nearly knocking Daniel off his feet. His knees buckled. One of the puppies slipped slightly from his grasp, and his heart stopped. He lunged, clutching it tighter, but the motion cost him precious balance. That's when Luna made her choice. With a guttural bark, she swam in front of him, bracing her body against the current. Her smaller frame didn't stand a chance against the torrent, but she pushed anyway, every muscle straining. The flood battered her, but she didn't move. She was shielding them, sacrificing her strength for their chance. Daniel's chest ached, not just from exhaustion but from the sight. This dog, abandoned and betrayed by humans, was now trusting him with everything she had left. "Not without you," he growled, forcing his legs forward with renewed fury. He would not leave her behind. Together, step by brutal step, they inched toward the truck's headlights glowing faintly through the rain. Daniel could feel his body giving out, but Luna's presence beside him was like fire in his veins. And finally, his boots struck gravel. They had made it to the edge of safety. But as Daniel collapsed onto higher ground, cradling the puppies, he turned and realized Luna was no longer beside him. She was gone, swallowed by the flood. Daniel's chest heaved as he stumbled onto the higher ground, his boots sinking into the soaked gravel. He collapsed against the side of his truck, his arms wrapped tightly around the 4 trembling puppies. Their tiny whimpers pierced through the storm, each fragile sound a reminder of the life he had just fought to preserve. But his eyes darted back to the raging flood. "Luna!" he shouted, his voice raw and desperate, but the storm swallowed his cry. Sheets of rain blurred his vision, and lightning lit the torrent like an angry beast tearing through the land. She wasn't there. His throat tightened. She had been right beside him, fighting the river, bracing against the current. She had shielded him and the puppies, her body a barrier against the torrent. And then, she was gone. Daniel looked down at the puppies in his arms. Their eyes, wide and pleading, reflected his own fear. They needed warmth, shelter, and care right now. Every instinct screamed at him to rush them into the truck, wrap them in blankets, and save them from the cold that threatened to sap the life from their tiny bodies. But Luna, the mother who had risked everything, the dog who had faced betrayal from humans but still fought to protect her pups. Could he really walk away and leave her to the flood? His heart pounded, torn in two. He placed the puppies gently into the passenger seat of his truck, wrapping them in his soaked flannel shirt. They squirmed and cried, pawing weakly at the fabric, but at least they were contained and off the ground. He slammed the door shut, his mind racing. "Stay with me," he whispered to them, though his eyes never left the furious water. The flood roared like a challenge. The logical voice in his mind screamed, "If you go back in, you may not come out. Then who takes care of them?" But another voice, quieter and heavier, pushed back. "You don't abandon loyalty. You don't let her sacrifice mean nothing." Daniel clenched his fists. His whole body shook. Not from the cold, but from the weight of the choice. He sprinted back toward the riverbank. "Luna!" he bellowed, his voice cracking under the storm. He scanned the surface, his eyes darting desperately over the debris-choked current. For a moment, nothing. Just water. Just chaos. Then movement. A dark shape bobbed against the current, half submerged, vanishing beneath the waves and reappearing with every violent surge. His heart lurched. It was her. Without hesitation, Daniel kicked off his boots and dove into the water. The icy flood swallowed him instantly, dragging him under. His muscles screamed in protest, his lungs burning as he clawed back to the surface. "Luna!" he gasped, fighting to keep his head above the waves. He kicked furiously, his arms slicing through the freezing torrent as he swam toward the shape. Every second counted. The current slammed him sideways into a branch, tearing the skin on his shoulder, but he didn't stop. Pain was irrelevant. Nothing mattered but reaching her. When he finally got close, he saw her clearly, and his chest constricted. Luna was exhausted. Her eyes were barely open, her paws twitching weakly against the water. She wasn't fighting anymore. She was surrendering. "No!" Daniel roared, lunging forward. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her tight against his chest. Her body was heavy, waterlogged, but he could still feel the faint rise and fall of her ribcage. She was alive but fading fast. "Not today, girl. You're not leaving them. You're not leaving me." With every ounce of strength left in him, Daniel kicked toward the shore. The current fought him, dragging at his legs, threatening to pull them both under. His muscles screamed with exhaustion. His lungs begged for air, but he pushed harder. Inch by inch, he forced them forward. Luna's limp form cradled against him. The world narrowed to one thought: don't let go. Finally, his feet scraped gravel. With a guttural roar, Daniel heaved Luna out of the water and collapsed onto the bank, gasping for breath. He lay there for a moment, rain pounding against his face, the storm raging above him. Then he turned to her. Luna's chest rose shallowly, her breaths ragged. Her eyes flickered open just enough to meet his. "You're safe," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "You hear me? You're safe." He scooped her into his arms, stumbling back toward the truck. Every step felt like miles, but adrenaline carried him. When he reached the door, the puppies' cries filled the cab, their tiny heads poking from the bundle of his shirt. Daniel slid Luna gently onto the seat beside them. The puppies instantly wriggled toward her, pressing their small bodies against her soaked fur. One by one, they nestled against her warmth, whimpering softly. Luna, barely conscious, shifted just enough to curl around them. Daniel's eyes burned. Despite everything, the storm, the betrayal, the flood, her instinct was still to protect them first. He climbed into the driver's seat, his hands trembling as he turned the key. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the rain. His farm was miles away, but he knew he had to drive now. It was the only chance to get them warm and safe. As the truck jolted forward, Daniel glanced at Luna. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes heavy, but her pups were safe against her chest. "You fought for them," he whispered, his voice raw. "Now I'll fight for you." The road ahead was dark and dangerous, but Daniel pressed on, determined. For the first time that night, a fragile thread of hope pulled at his chest. But deep inside, he knew the hardest part was yet to come. The storm still raged as Daniel's truck barreled down the narrow country road. The wipers fought furiously against the sheets of rain, but visibility was nearly zero. Water surged in ditches along the roadside, and the headlights illuminated the ghostly silhouettes of trees swaying violently in the wind. Inside the cab, the atmosphere was a fragile mix of desperation and hope. The puppies whimpered softly, burrowing deeper against Luna's chest. Their tiny bodies shivered, but the sound of her faint heartbeat seemed to comfort them. Luna herself lay motionless, her breathing shallow, her fur plastered to her skin from the flood. Daniel's grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked from the road to the dog curled up on the seat beside him. His shoulder throbbed from the gash he had earned in the water, but pain was the last thing on his mind. "Hold on, girl," he whispered over the hum of the engine. "Just hold on. We're almost home." But the farm was still miles away, and the storm was worsening. Twice, he skidded dangerously close to the edge of the road, the tires hydroplaning on the slick asphalt. Each time, he clenched his jaw, refusing to give in to panic. Losing control wasn't an option. Not tonight. When he finally turned into his driveway, the floodwaters were already pooling across the gravel path. He splashed through, parked near the barn, and threw open the door. The puppies squealed as the cold air rushed in, but Daniel moved quickly. He scooped Luna into his arms, her body limp, her eyes only half open. With his other hand, he cradled the bundle of puppies against his chest. He staggered into the house, kicking the door shut behind him. The warmth inside was relative. The power had gone out earlier, and the only light came from a lantern on the kitchen table. Still, it was shelter. It was safety. Daniel laid Luna on a blanket near the fireplace, then rushed to strike a match. The fire hissed and crackled to life, throwing a faint glow across the room. He set the puppies close, wrapping them in towels before returning to Luna. Her eyes flickered open, barely visible in the firelight. She looked at him with that same unspoken plea he had seen before, a mix of trust and exhaustion. "You're not giving up," Daniel said, his voice firm though his throat ached with emotion. "Not after everything you've done. You've got more fight in you." He dried her fur with a towel, working carefully, whispering to her as though his words might anchor her spirit. The puppies wriggled closer to her belly, squeaking softly. Luna shifted just enough to let them nestle against her. That simple act nearly broke Daniel. Even at the edge of collapse, she was still a mother first. Hours passed in a blur. The wind howled against the windows, and rain hammered the roof like drumbeats. Daniel sat beside the fire, refusing to leave her side. Every time her breathing faltered, his chest tightened. Every time the puppies whimpered, he adjusted the towels or shifted the firewood to keep them warm. By midnight, exhaustion clawed at him. His eyes burned, his body trembled with fatigue, but he couldn't close them. He was terrified that if he blinked too long, she would slip away. At one point, Luna stirred. Her paw twitched, reaching weakly across the blanket. Daniel caught it in his hand, gently squeezing. "You're not alone," he whispered. "Not anymore. I promise you that." The storm outside seemed endless. Branches snapped, thunder roared, and the house shook under the wind's assault. But inside, around the flickering fire, there was a fragile sanctuary. A man, a mother dog, and her 4 fragile puppies, bound together in the fight for survival. Sometime near dawn, Daniel's head jerked upright. He hadn't realized he had dozed off against the wall. His heart lurched in panic, and he immediately looked to Luna. For a terrible second, she was still. Too still. "Luna!" His voice cracked as he leaned forward, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. And then there it was, a faint but steady rise and fall beneath his palm. Her breath was weak, but it was there. A sob of relief escaped his throat. He pressed his forehead against her damp fur, tears burning his eyes. "That's it, girl. You're still here." The puppies stirred awake, their tiny noses rooting against her, their squeaks filling the quiet dawn. Luna shifted, curling faintly closer to them, as though reassured by their presence. Daniel stoked the fire, his shoulders finally sagging. The worst of the storm was passing, but the hardest truth remained. She wasn't out of danger yet. He would need a vet as soon as the roads cleared. Still, for the first time since the flood had swallowed their world, hope felt real. As the first light of morning broke through the rain-streaked window, Daniel sat there with them, an unlikely family forged in the darkest of nights. And though exhaustion pulled at him, he knew one thing with certainty. He would not let her fight alone. The storm had finally loosened its grip by the time the sun rose. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and broken branches, and the roads were littered with debris. For hours, Daniel had paced the floor of his farmhouse, torn between exhaustion and determination. Luna had made it through the night, but her breathing remained shallow, and her eyes opened only briefly before sliding shut again. The puppies pressed close against her belly, squeaking as though they, too, were urging her to hold on. Daniel didn't wait any longer. As soon as the floodwaters outside had receded just enough, he wrapped Luna in a dry blanket, tucked the puppies into a small box lined with towels, and carried them all out to his truck. His muscles screamed from fatigue, but his focus was sharp. Get them to the vet. The drive into town felt longer than it ever had before. Every pothole, every bump in the road made his heart lurch, afraid that the fragile life beside him would flicker out. He spoke constantly, his voice filling the cab as much for himself as for her. You're tougher than this, Luna. I've seen it. You've carried them through a flood, you can carry yourself through this. We're almost there. Just hold on. At last, he skidded into the gravel lot of Dr. Harper's veterinary clinic. The bell above the door jingled sharply as he burst inside, his arms straining under the weight of the blanket-wrapped dog. Help! Please! It's urgent! Daniel's voice cracked. Dr. Harper, a woman in her late 40s with kind but focused eyes, rushed out from the back. One glance at Luna and she nodded sharply. Bring her in. The next half hour was a blur of antiseptic smells, hurried instructions, and the soft cries of puppies in their box. Daniel stood frozen near the exam table, his hands clenched into fists, until Dr. Harper finally turned toward him. She's weak, she said softly, but she's alive. She's been through something extraordinary, and her body's exhausted. We'll need to keep her here for fluids, warmth, and observation. But you brought her in just in time. Relief slammed into him like a wave, and Daniel dropped into the nearest chair, his face buried in his hands. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe. The puppies, miraculously unharmed, were carried in to be examined as well. Dr. Harper smiled faintly as they wriggled and squeaked. These little ones are fighters, just like their mother. When Daniel finally returned home hours later, the storm was only a memory. The sky was clear, and the world smelled of renewal. Yet inside, he felt changed in a way he couldn't quite describe. He had always lived alone, keeping mostly to himself on the farm. But now the silence felt different. The farmhouse wasn't empty anymore. It carried the echoes of survival, of loyalty, of a bond that had been born in the darkest night. Over the next weeks, Luna slowly regained her strength. Daniel visited the clinic every day, often bringing small blankets or food, sitting beside her kennel for hours. He would talk about the farm, about the sun breaking through the trees in the morning, about the puppies tumbling over each other in a makeshift pen he had built in the barn. The first time Luna stood on her own again, her legs shaky but determined, Daniel felt his chest swell with pride. She looked at him with those deep, dark eyes, and for a moment it was as if she understood everything, that he had fought for her life as fiercely as she had fought for her puppies. When she was finally cleared to return home, Daniel opened the farmhouse door with trembling hands. The puppies yipped excitedly, tumbling toward her, and Luna stepped inside slowly, sniffing, her tail giving the faintest wag. She lay down on the rug near the fire, and her puppies piled onto her in a wriggling heap. Daniel knelt beside them, his hand resting gently on her back. You're safe now, he whispered. All of you are. Word of the rescue spread through the town. Neighbors stopped by with bags of dog food, toys, and blankets. Strangers sent letters, touched by the story of the Bulldog mother who had carried her puppies through a flood. But for Daniel, the true miracle wasn't in the attention. It was in the quiet moments at home, in the sound of tiny paws skittering across the floor. in the sight of Luna sleeping peacefully by the fire, in the feeling that, for the first time in years, his house was full of life and love. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sunset, Luna climbed up beside him, her head resting heavily against his leg. The puppies tumbled in the grass below, yipping and barking in the golden light. Daniel rubbed her ears gently, his throat tight with gratitude. "You saved them," he murmured. "And somehow you saved me too." The storm had taken so much, but it had given something greater in return. A bond unbreakable, forged in the heart of struggle. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with someone who loves inspiring stories. Together, let's keep spreading messages of courage, loyalty, and hope. And from that day on, Daniel knew he would never face another storm alone.